She's gonna do something tomorrow, and this is my thing today.
Okay.
My thing's kind of dumber.
I like it. This is, see, women often tend to denigrate their achievements.
Don't try to turn this back on me.
I'm doing it.
The charger is like holding on for dear life.
I love this only because I think I know what you're gonna do tomorrow.
Do you
Yeah.
I actually have an academic plan too.
I know.
Okay.
Wait, are like all of the like the seniors or something doing like a...
Yeah, we're all presenting.
No, the seniors are just like the seniors have the social confidence to pretend that they're a TA, but there's 2 actual TAs.
Oh
Wait, there's
it's
TAs?
you two,
Yeah.
right?
It's what I call Wednesday afternoon.
I literally
Look at
don't
this.
know that.
I figured it out.
We're not the most TA of TAs. In other classes, they're like teaching the class, and we're just like,
Very
here.
nice.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Do you guys feel like, from a female perspective, your opinions are often disregarded because of your gender?
Certain men. I think, I don't agree that it's every guy, but I think I've definitely had the experience with like the freshman I've said where it's like, there are certain guys where they'll just talk and talk and talk, and no matter what you say, you just cannot break through. And it's definitely like there's an undercurrent of like misogyny.
Or like the fact that they disagree with you? Because like often, at my dinners, I have 3 brothers and my dad, and we'd just like sometimes disagree with my mom, and she'd get up and she'd be like, oh, if there's another girl in the family, I'd have support. But, like, she puts that on gender rather than like the logic that she's using that we just disagree with.
I think my dad says the same thing, because my family is, my mom has 7 sisters, and I have mostly female cousins, and we're 2 daughters and like a wife and a husband, so to be put it mildly, men are outnumbered in my family by a pretty significant margin, and my dad also says like, oh, if I had a son, like, this wouldn't happen. I mean, he's mostly joking, but I think it's certain guys, I don't even think it's if they disagree with you, I think some guys just like to hear the depth. There's definitely enough guys I've seen where it's a trend that I think men can believe they have more to say than women, but I wouldn't say it's every guy by a long shot.
I think it's also sometimes a matter of pride. Like you have to frame your points in a way that isn't taking away from their pride.
Yeah, caters to their ego, but I don't do that.
That's
do.
true.
Do you want to invite them into the conversation?
Sure.
What are you guys talking
So
about?
when
Sexism in linguistics.
Ooh.
if we bring this back to linguistics, if we bring what?
Does anybody else want that bagel?
No.
No.
You're like actively eating a bagel right now.
If we
Not disrupt.
Yeah, alright, so basically, wait, so what were you, before they walked in, what were you saying?
Caleb asked, like, do you think, as a woman, do you think you're, like, spoken over by men? And my answer is not every guy, but there's enough to where I'd say there's a slight societal trend, you know?
Oh, that's assault.
Like, when there are guys who talk over me, they immediately talk over me.
they immediately what?
No, like, when they're, not every guy by, like, a long shot, but there are enough men that have, like, talked over me, and when they do, like, have that kind of opinion of, like, speaking over women, like that guy in their history class, it's, like, really bad.
I don't think it's a good thing you go around thinking like, oh, I'm a woman, so like anywhere where it's male dominated, I can't talk. You know what I mean? Like that's not true.
In 8th grade, I had an English class, and we had a very politically active English teacher, a very left wing, and she was very adamant about her political beliefs, and oftentimes she tried to like teach us her political ideology, and kind of like, it was interesting, but anyway, that class was dominated by females, and in that class, I've had the same experience you're describing, but in the opposite sense. When if we bring this back to linguistics, like how are these power dynamics expressed through linguistics? It has to do with like the tonality of your voice, what specific words you're using, the phonetics, is that the right word? And basically, our brains use phonetics, right, to navigate different power dynamics, right?
Kind of. So
Yeah, like
The short answer is that we have no idea what's going on, like scientifically. Like we know that something's going on, but there's nothing with certainty. So like this, as Antara pointed out, I didn't even realize this. I saw this book at the bookstore and I was like, oh, this is cool. I'll buy it. I had no idea it was written in 1998. That's so long ago.
I looked at the
So
publishing date.
a lot of stuff has changed since then. We have a lot more knowledge. That doesn't mean that like this is wrong, but this is still stuff that like people are trying to figure out. To go back to something we discussed on one of the earlier days, language exists. There are physiological differences in how like between genders of how humans produce language. So like people are going to understand generally men have lower voices than women, but only, I don't know how they know this, but they do, but only 50% of that can be explained by pitch.
The
by
variability.
By physiology. So like, men will have lower voices because their anatomy is different and it's gonna produce like lower pitch, but they're also doing something to lower their voice. Women's anatomy, their voices are gonna tend to be higher, and they're also doing something to raise the pitch of their voice, right? So some kind of, there's both physiology at play and socialization, right? Which is very interesting, because the working hypothesis that one could easily reach is like, oh, humans kind of had there's this difference, but then that difference started to mean something, and then that difference was then exacerbated because of the meaning behind it, right? I don't know.
So I just wanna wonder, like, is there a difference in languages, between like male-dominated versus female-dominated, like, languages themselves? And is there any chance that has to do with the amount that people speak in that language, and like the presence of silence in conversations? Because I'd imagine that languages and the ways people communicate, like in certain languages, there's more silence in communication between people than in other languages, and I'd also assume that in languages and certain cultures, there'd be a different role of male and female in conversation. So like, do you know if that exists, or?
You're saying whether or not women dominate languages more, like conversations more in certain languages?
In certain languages, like the difference in languages in terms of male versus female dominated conversations.
Yeah, the person in this is arguing, and most linguistic case that we're studying the sociolinguistics of English and perhaps Western civilization.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting question. Do these concepts still play out in different languages?
That's the issue, I think, with a lot of like social sciences, especially learning them in the West, is Americans had a tendency to view the entire world through a microcosm American. I don't know the answer. I think if you look at the sayings, including my favorite one, where there are women in geese, there's noise, I think it's funny. I think if you look at the sayings on the front of this document, it indicates that there's a general global trend to see that women, like the stereotype has roots in many different cultures, but I don't know enough to say whether or not it's like every language.
You also wonder like how much like,
No.
I love you. We have bagels.
but I also wonder like how much of that has to do with like colonialism and the fact that we're basing our world view off of a world post-colonialist, where a lot of cultures and languages have been affected by colonialism of England and the US.
That's difficult to answer. I don't know if you can ever truly find out, because how do you go back to 500 years ago, like British India, for example, and find out what Indian people thought then?
You read,
Yeah.
And how do you compare languages without like having deep knowledge of many languages and living in many languages?
I mean, over the summer when I was at case studies and LGBTQ plus rights and colonialism and colonialism and its impact on the view of LGBTQ plus rights in different regions of the world, and we often found that pre-colonialism a lot of cultures were accepting of all different types of sexuality. So it's interesting to see, and it would be interesting to analyze how language has changed pre and post colonialist and sort of the role of women and men in society. But I think this class is English, so it's not really.
It's an interesting point. Okay, I think we're due for a break soon-ish, I wanna say, so, okay, when Clay gives me food, that's a really pretty good indication that we're done with break in about 15 minutes. So does anyone have any, I'm gonna say brief, because I don't wanna drag this on forever, any brief last arguments you'd like to make before we go on break?
Are we gonna talk about this when we come back?
I don't think so.
What's that?
Right.
Why can't we?
It's
Go,
fine.
go, go.
We can't, I mean, it's up to Mr. Abel.
We can.
Can we?
If we, let's, I think people want a break, so we can, final thoughts before we go to break, and then when we come back from break, we can decide what we wanna do. It's so nice to teach when you don't have you know that there's not another class 5 minutes after yours. Chill.
I think for a lot of these different power structures, I think a lot of it is based culturally.
So about that. That's
Alright.
exactly what that's about.
Okay,
Maybe Neil will do that when we come back.
We'll do that after we go back.
Right.
You guys have been talking for like an hour. Thank you. Let's go on break. We will do it after we go.
Wait, Jay, what were you saying? You remember what you were saying about different languages?
Yeah.
I was just saying, now that you guys have like talked about this, you're gonna go over the
We have a log like in
like go visit all the atriums and see like how like how the
Well, the only one I hang out is Asian cooking, which is just women in
I'm not sure what you're saying. I'm taking notes. Wait,
That's
what?
just like colonialism has played like a big role in our perception of the world and different
When does
countries
break
and
end?
regions and the regions of the world which are accepting of people and like not accepting people.
People will come back eventually.
And it's often been like
maybe sooner.
colonial, like Western, like
Mr. Abel,
England,
can I tell you about my thing for tomorrow?
colonialist powers like that that have impacted cultures around the world.
You're
Like
like mine's dumber, and she's like,
Dude, I'm not processing what you're saying.
I was just talking about
Yeah.
like
Okay,
how
okay, so I wanted to start
colonialism
out
in the
showing a
past has
couple of, like,
affected,
clips of, like,
from
not
I know,
showing up
like from
every
studying,
related
like
things.
the
I wanna
perceptions
show
of
one
and
clip
acceptance
from
of sexuality
the
all around the world.
Kardashians. Maybe a
And there's
clip
a
from,
chance
like,
that
mainstream, like just like a news clip,
the
but
spread
I
of
wanna find, like, a male
English
speaker.
has
And then like
affected,
maybe
like,
another clip from like a movie or something.
different
and I wanna go
languages
through each
and
one
the
and say,
presence of
like,
male
but,
and
like, a
female
monologue or something.
Sexual
Talking.
dynamics.
And say like,
or
do we
well,
believe
I was
and
relating
why?
it
What
to like
in the way they're
linguistics,
speaking
like the
and
fact of like the
stuff.
presence of
And then like go
men and
into
women
like
in
Johnny Depp. I'm just
conversation
gonna find like
and how that's
I have a
changed
couple,
over the
like,
years as a
articles
result
on, like,
of
the
colonialism.
psychology
Our
behind the,
approach to
like, study, but,
sexuality?
like, psychology behind why
Well,
the
that too,
majority
yeah.
or like the general population
And you're saying,
believes
like,
either side based on how they're speaking.
Like you're saying,
But,
like basically
maybe I'll-
colonial
like,
societal
one person
structures and the
also show,
language
like,
that
a
reflects
video
that
of, like, just the
change the
overall
way we
design. I don't know
approach
if
different
you
aspects
know,
of society,
about
like
it.
sexuality and
But
things
then,
like that.
so did you do this
Like
in RI where like for
ideas
the
of sexuality from England
unit,
affected
like Miss Abarsana made
Native
us,
American
like, go on
cultures.
TikTok and find one
not just
TikTok
Native American,
related to,
Like
all
agriculture.
over
Yeah,
Asia
so,
and
like,
Africa.
What were like the
I was so
what were the
cool because
pre-existing
literally, like,
sexual
the way we're
structures?
Feel like way more
experiencing
accepting
something brought to
of
the classroom.
like a
So
spectrum
I
of
was thinking we could do
sexuality.
that,
Really?
like,
Yeah.
Find one TikTok.
Really?
Like
ancient
the
Greece.
trial.
Yeah,
Yeah,
give
everybody
like
knows.
10 minutes and like go find one TikTok.
Yeah.
They're, like,
and
gay
then
and
just, like,
stuff?
show them.
Yeah.
But then
Wait,
just the way
really?
that, like,
Wait, so there were, like,
I
examples
don't
of,
know
like-
if it was right, but, like, it's
In-
really,
in
like,
what
TikTok
context?
is
I'm
really
not familiar
portraying
there.
Amber Heard as like the
Like,
liar, like
in
snaky woman,
Asia
you know what I mean? And like that's like really
Nigeria, I think
interesting
there
to
were
see like the way
also
she's speaking.
tribes used to be
So
like
like
very
that,
accepting
and then
of
I don't know, also
Like
bring it back
orgies.
to the, like,
forms of
few clips we showed in the
sexuality,
beginning of like
and it
why
wasn't
we
viewed as
believe
something
them,
like
so
actually
we believe,
bad,
you
like
know
it
what I
was like
mean?
commonly
But, like,
accepted,
yeah, something like
and
that.
then once
But then I also want to see if
colonialism
I can
happened,
find. I've seen
there was this massive
I've
shift
seen
in
like
perception.
activities done before where like everyone
That's what
gets
this
a
is.
card
Explain this to
and
me.
you have to like
Okay.
write certain statements
This
on
is
the
very
card,
Jordan
and then we
Peterson-esque.
shuffle it up and see what we believe.
Okay, and
and
Jordan-
choose one,
red
but
flag.
like
It
separate.
is a red flag because Jordan Peterson
Okay.
lies
And
on
something
this
like
side of the
that, like
hierarchy.
like not specifically
Okay.
that, but like how
Okay.
something how like
Basically,
anonymity like affects the way
Biological
we perceive it, like,
conscious systems
I don't know,
have to
just
organize
yeah,
themselves under
so
some
that's my
principle,
plan.
right?
I like
And
that.
Jordan
That'll
Peterson,
be fun.
his idea, his basic construct is that the only way hierarchies can emerge is in this pyramidal structure. Like this is his opinion over here. Like this is like what he talks about.
I know.
You know what I'm saying? Like he talks about how the only way things can work is like this.
Yeah.
And if you remember, he went. Where's my fucking iPad? Basically, okay, whatever. Okay, what was I saying? Basically, so remember when he went on that Kathy Newman show on the Australia thing?
No.
And you talked to that woman about like feminism.
What's this? It's like on YouTube and stuff.
Right, it's like on YouTube, and it's like everyone was making fun. It's like, oh, Jordan Peterson mocks this woman. And it's like, okay, sure, but basically, the woman was talking about how males dominate hierarchies. She was talking about like the gender wage pay gap, and basically, as you go up in this pyramidal structure, like this is like an example of a corporate structure, right? If you go up in this structure, what happens? You get more money. Right? Money goes up as you go up. Exactly. So basically, the typical distribution of these hierarchies is that there's generally more male to female. Like, if we define the ratio of male to female as like equal to what variable? Like m? Like m goes up, essentially, right? Okay, I'm kind of like loose, but basically he was saying that men dominate these hierarchies because they're more competitive creatures. And that his basic argument was that at the lower levels of our cognition, we still operate on this idea that violence, he said that violence underlays all physical interactions. And women are not as competitive in these systems because of these biological contracts relative to like submissiveness and dominance.
See, there's an argument
so-
against that because cultures in the past, there's been cultures where women have been the dominant and more aggressive
Right.
people in the society and culture, and they've
So it's like
taken
yeah.
more active roles in like providing for the community and different things like that. So it's hard to make that assumption that men are just more naturally competitive.
Right. Right. I agree with what you're saying. Basically, the constructs that we created in the modern 21st century reward male behavior, male archetypes, and that's why male dominate within these hierarchies. But what the Kathy woman was saying is, how can we make corporate structures more feminine focused? Right? And Jordan Peterson said, female-orientated structures will not succeed in a competitive capitalist economy. And the reason why these structures emerge in different corporations is because these are the specific corporations that are successful in the global economy.
I see that.
So basically, Kathy was talking about how can we make these hierarchies so that they allow for females to thrive within that environment. So basically, this hierarchy values what? It values competitiveness.
This is good. This is like.
It values,
you say it's good?
This makes sense.
Alright.
it values competitiveness, what? Aggressiveness.
Yeah.
Like these male attributes. But basically, Kathy was saying, how can you create new hierarchies that value like sympathy, compassion?
Well, that's not gonna. I think it's less of how can we create. I think that's never in like a system where like capitalism thrives. That's not gonna be the case, because that's just not, like, you can't change capitalism to encompass sympathy and compassion. Like, it just doesn't work.
So basically,
You have to.
Jordan Pierce. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, instead, like, if you want this to switch in a capitalist society, you have to make it societally more acceptable for women to be competitive and aggressive and have those attributes.
So basically, Jordan Peterson's entire ideology is that the only way humans can survive or thrive is within capitalist-like systems, and within those systems, these male dominance hierarchies that are pyramidal in geometry thrive within those environments, and thus the only people at the top of these hierarchies will be male, because the attributes that are rewarded within these hierarchies are these male attributes that females typically do not have. And this has to do with like the underlying notions regarding like hormones and neurological structures in the female. You understand what I'm trying to say, like in terms of biology?
Yeah.
So Kathy was talking about how can we create new structures. The problem is, how do we value these structures, these attributes in the structure? I don't think within a pyramid, when you go against gravity, like
You can.
you can't. But what if we change this hierarchy to something like this? Now, if you think about different cultures before, you made the colonialism point, right? Like Native Americans had a completely different approach to society. It was more communal.
Yeah.
Sexuality was different. Like, if you think about sexuality in this context, what happens? The male at the top of the sexual dominance hierarchy, this hierarchy emerges throughout nature, or in different structures, but even like, you've seen alpacas? I was watching a documentary on alpacas, right? And basically, it's one dude who owns like a plot of land, and then all these females come to graze, and then he mates with them, and then within that structure, that biological system, this hierarchy emerges, pyramidal.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of like going off the top here, but this pyramidal structure is expressed in corporate structures, capitalism, sexuality. But if we talked about like different cultures, like in Indian, Native American societies, they had a different situation going on. And within this, I think we see more matriarchal, or maybe a more balance. If this is a female hierarchy and this is a male hierarchy, maybe we're looking for something in the middle in terms of efficiency.
Yeah.
I don't know. But this hierarchy is present within our brains. Like we subconsciously process this, and that's the lobster example. Mr. Abel, you know the lobster example, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I feel like lobsters aren't humans. I mean, humans for like thousands of years lived without, or with very little hierarchy.
No, we always have hierarchies.
We had very little hierarchy. There were very egalitarian societies. I mean, like, in Sapiens, for example, he points to like the hunter-gatherer societies were relatively egalitarian for much of human.
I see what you're saying. So
I feel like the thing with humans is that they don't inherently have one system within them. The thing that defines humans, I think, is that, or one of the things that defines humans is like they're very adaptable, so they can live in a bunch of different systems.
23 minutes.
yeah, it's, I think I know what you're saying.
Yeah.
So in a more tribal situations, right? The interesting thing about tribes, I think tribes. I don't actually understand how tribal hierarchies work because I haven't studied tribal cultures. But my current hypothesis is that the geometry of it's completely different.
Yeah, that's true.
It's a circle. But there's no top, there's no bottom, there's just a circle, as opposed to that. But the lobster example I'm trying to describe to you is that we do have the same neurological circuits, fundamentally. We do. If we use them or not, I'm not sure. But basically, with lobsters, what happens is there's 2 lobster males, right? 1 and 2, and then they fight. And the person who wins, in terms of a pyramid, goes up the dominance hierarchy, and the lobster who loses goes below the dominance hierarchy. And scientists have found that the actual level of serotonin in their brains, the actual like neurochemical serotonin, goes down. Serotonin goes down. Anyone serotonin is associated with?
No,
Like happiness.
like the
Mood regulation.
Okay.
Serotonin is the principal hormone responsible for modulating your mood. So if you're at the top of your hierarchy, your serotonin is high, your mood regulation is high. If you're at the bottom of the hierarchy, your mood regulation is low. Then what happens? You become easier to control. For the people at the top, mood regulation. Now, interesting, what happens to your linguistic profile when your mood regulation changes? Linguistics reflects our current status within the hierarchy and the mood regulation. And the different phonetics, linguistics, like phonetics, the different linguistic and phonetic profiles change depending on your position within this hierarchy.
Okay.
You understand? Do you understand like what I'm trying to say with violence being the underlying principle?
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's interesting. Like Kathy talked about how can we change it. Jordan Peterson's like you can't change it. But I don't agree. I don't know if I agree. I don't know what to agree with. But maybe I don't know if this is the ideal structure because it's very tribal. Like we see this in African tribes, Native Americans.
Yeah. I mean that really only works when you have much smaller, close-knit societies usually. The more egalitarian society. Because when you have the more people, oftentimes like you kind of lose the tighter connection, and so like think of it like I kind of think of it like family. Like it doesn't. If you think about our modern society and think about how like the like fierce egalitarianism of the hunter-gatherers, it doesn't make it. It's hard to imagine, but when you think of it like families, right? Because that's essentially what they were. You can see how it was like oftentimes much more equal.
Yeah, and you know what's also interesting within those tribes? When Jake talked about this, sexuality was approached differently.
Yeah.
Like it was like a lot of Native American tribes. Okay, this is like one idea with their cover, like what happens with different hierarchical structures as population increases. But Native American tribes, one woman would have sex with like a bunch of men. Like there was no idea of like marital constructs. And this idea was that, oh, you get like a mix of these different genes. Like that's what they fundamentally believed. And within the dude, we came back to your sexuality concept.
Oh, really?
Okay.
It's not mine, but.
So basically we're talking about different like hierarchical structures.
Yeah.
And in the more, we don't know what this is yet. Maybe it's female, but this, let's just operate under the assumption that this is true. No, that's the. So I actually read something about or listened to something about Native American sexual dynamics, and basically there were a lot of tribes where there was no like defined marital or sexual hierarchies, and that like men had sex with women and women had sex with other men. It was like this giant orgy, and they had this idea that like there was a belief in some tribes that Native Americans, like these women, if they had sex with if I'm a woman had sex with 3 of you, like my kid would be like the combined genetic beauty of the 3 of you. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
They actually believed and they operated under those constructs. I mean, maybe they're true. Like this is like epigenetics.
They're not true.
No, okay.
That's not how it works.
I mean,
But
that's
it was
for
a,
example,
it was a cultural belief.
It was a cultural belief.
You can't split us 3 ways.
Huh?
It works. I think partially, I mean, why that's changed too is just like the fact that we understand more about like the creation of life and scientifically, like we understand the processes. So we sort of created a society around around the process of reproduction and the fact that, I mean, you were talking about 3 people thinking it being like all 3 of their children, like we've known that it's not necessarily that, it's more of one relationship with another person. We sort of base society off of that. And now as we learn more and more about like genetics and reproduction.
I think.
Do you think that's like a fair, like?
I don't know. I don't know what I want to do.
The question is, what effect does mood regulation have on your linguistic profile? Okay, Ben.
Yeah.
What do you think about different hierarchical structures as population size increases?
I think that's generally true. I don't know if it was. I think with the agricultural revolution, we started seeing more hierarchies in society.
You know what's interesting? Bees.
Yeah, they're interesting.
That's a matriarchal society, and it's this. It's not that.
Yeah.
And very hierarchical.
No, but it's female oriented.
Yeah, but very hierarchical. And they even try to cheat the system.
Huh?
Bees try to cheat the system.
How so?
Sometimes. So obviously they have the queen, and then they have like the worker bees, and then they have the drones, right? And everyone has like their roles. And then, for example, the drones have to go out and like pollinate the flowers, and then come back to the hive. And there are guard bees that like won't let them into the hive unless they have like, enough pollen. Also, sometimes there can be another hive that's close by, and there's like no food in it, so they'll try to go into a hive and like take food from it. And the guard bees like know that that's a thing, so therefore like all the bees have a scent, and the guard bees can tell you if you belong in that hive or not. So if you try to get in, the guard bees will try to kill you. But the guard bees, sometimes the bees know that, and so the bees will try to sneak in, and they'll try to bribe the guard bees, and then sometimes the guard bees let them in.
That's actually really interesting.
Yeah, pollen.
Can they send themselves?
No, because the guard bees are like, you're not supposed to be here because you don't have, like, you're not part of this hive, this isn't your hive. And then the bee is like, yeah, I know that. So here's some pollen at the end. Yeah.
That is cool. I didn't know that.
So what would you say the geometry of a bee hierarchy is?
It's like the triangle.
I have no idea.
Yo, what is that?
This? Maybe it's the combination of male dominance hierarchies and female dominance hierarchies. Maybe the thing in the middle is this. And this is how we can like measure human behavior. Perhaps. It's a cone. It's not a pyramid. It's not a circle. But Jake,
Why is it a female dominated pattern also like
maybe it is.
because by definition there's some.
Is it though?
Why are you watching
Is it?
See, I was having a conversation with something about like the female orgasm versus the male
What
orgasm.
thing were you talking to?
Huh?
Who are you talking to?
I'm not gonna say something.
The entity.
An entity. And basically, linguistics has something to do with this, bro. Why are you guys engaged in this conversation?
Gender?
I engaged.
Okay. So do you agree with my point that all interactions are based on the underlying fact of physical balance?
Yeah.
Have you changed your mind?
That all underlying.
All interactions are based on the underlying fact of physical balance.
I don't think so.
Not based on,
I don't think they're based on it exists at the
That's
lower
why I
level.
have like friendships, because I'm afraid of violence.
I mean,
Yeah, I don't
okay.
talk to people.
The reason, see, the current constructs we have emerged from earlier constructs that relied purely on violence. The behaviors that we that we operate on, evolved from situations based off violence.
No, I mean human beings and also animals have always also inherently been shown inherent like nurturing and love for each other as well, like completely non-violent reactions. I mean, what is a parent's love for their child? Do you think there's violent interactions between a parent and their child?
It's this physical entity outside of my relationship with this baby poses a threat.
Yeah, but why does a parent and a mother like why does a parent and a child talk? Like are they gonna kill each other?
Have you ever thought about like the interaction between a son and his father?
My dad's one day to grow.
Yeah, sure, but there's a lot of situations where a son challenges a father or whatever, and violence emerges. Our patriarchal structures are inherently.
But that's the thing, patriarchal structures, not human structures.
Okay, so that's what this is about. It's about like patriarchal versus matriarchal structures. In different ways, that has effects on linguistic profiles. I'm saying we can't escape the lower levels of cognition.
Yeah, but I wouldn't agree that violence is inherently the lower level of cognition. Like, I can escape my need for food, no matter how evolved I am. That's like something on the lower level. I need to eat to like survive. I need to sleep 8 hours a day to like.
Yeah, but you can nowadays you can fast. You can control your body. Like you can like literally starve yourself to death.
I mean,
if you
humans
have enough willpower.
have always been able to fast and like starve themselves to
Like
death.
you
We've
can
had to
literally-
starve and fast.
In Hinduism, people fast for ages and
Yeah.
ages, but like, you can't escape certain lower levels of your cognition. Like the stress mechanism that Strabo mentioned, that's such a like reptilian brain thing.
Yeah.
Why do I get stressed out over an assignment that has no actual bearing on
You know,
Like your survival.
On
You know-
Tara. Because at the lowers of your level of cognition, you're processing the fact that if I don't get good grades, I don't get a college, I don't get a good job, I starve.
Yeah, but it's like, instead of like in the modern system, instead of like short-term responses to stress, which were helpful, like, okay, short-term, you need to be stressed about not getting food because you're gonna die. Now it's long-term, like just this lower level anxiety that like
Yeah, if you
is
don't
not
do this,
very
you're not getting
helpful.
college, you're not getting a job, your life's ruined.
And then you starve, and
Yeah,
then
but
you
like
die.
but short-term responses to stress aren't helpful in situations like that. It just impedes your ability to do anything.
Is it though? Because people get stressed out and then they procrastinate and then they do the work that they need to do.
Yeah, but instead, there's always in modern society, there's always another thing to consider. Like the immediate stress response never leaves you fully.
On
See,
Tara.
those,
Yeah.
those stress responses are important, but there needs to be a balance. Like you can't have none, because then you're not going to
Yeah.
do any work. And if you have too much, then you're too stressed to like do anything productive.
And function.
Yeah.
Okay, so sorry, I interrupted.
No, it's fine.
Alright, Antara. The reason I was talking about violence is because of the lobster example. You know the lobster example, right?
Boiling water.
Huh?
Boiling water.
No. Okay, so lobsters operate. Okay, I just want to say this is all originates from Jordan Peterson, and I don't agree with Jordan Peterson because Jordan Peterson believes that this is the only structure that can emerge, and he says it is the way it is because it is the way it is, and I don't think it is the way it is. So when I bring up Jordan Peterson, don't think I'm his ideologue. I'm just bringing up ideas that he he describes.
It is reptile brain blown up.
Okay. So here's a pyramid, right? And male dominance hierarchies in the lobster population. Okay, lobsters compete for dominance within their particular domain, right? When two males compete, scientists measured this. One moves up the hierarchy, one moves down the hierarchy, and they can actually measure this by looking at the serotonin levels in their brains. The lobster at the top has higher levels of serotonin than the lobster at the bottom and all the lobsters at the bottom. Now, the interesting thing about serotonin is correlated with mood regulation. It's responsible for mood regulation. So, scientifically, biologically, lobsters are able to subconsciously track their position within some arbitrary hierarchy that they created, and then like it has a physical effect on their actual brain and the way they exist. Now, if you think about mood regulation, what happens as your mood regulation diminishes? Think about the linguistic profile and its effect on mood regulation. Or mood regulation's effect on your linguistic profile. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So when we're talking about social dynamics like this, and we're talking about some structures like this and maybe some structures like that, our brains subconsciously navigate those hierarchies, measure it with like serotonin and other neurochemicals, and then that has an effect on our linguistic profile.
They're saying if we perceive ourselves to be at the bottom of a hierarchy, we're more stressed, we lose the ability to regulate our emotions, and because of that we lose some degree of control over what we say.
Over what we say, and it affects the tonality of what we're saying, the inflection of what we're saying.
Which could explain why women
seem more emotional.
Seem more emotional because, you know, you're always, I mean, it's like, you're actually relating it back to what Nicole Holiday said back in there. It's like literally, you know, women talk more because they feel the need to explain themselves more because
Exactly.
Okay, we need to clean up this table.
Joseph, you see Sean
Everywhere.
6
Thank you for coming to school today. You got my absence, you know that?
The question is like the feedback loop.
Joseph,
I
6
just-
up to Leo, deuce, 39 minutes.
Seriously?
I'm sorry, can I like describe to you? I don't even know what the connections, but like pyramid, male dominance hierarchy, serotonin, money, mood regulation. This hierarchy values male archetypes like competitiveness, aggression, and then this Kathy feminist was talking about how can we create new structures that value feminine qualities like compassion and sympathy. And basically Jordan Peterson argued that the only hierarchies that emerge are pyramidal, and pyramidal structures value these dominance hierarchies.
That's a very male-centric point of view.
Yes, exactly. And the
But
female,
that's Jordan Peterson.
That's Jordan Peterson. And the female was saying, how can we create new corporate structures that value these human metrics, right? And then Jordan Peterson's argument was that those structures would not thrive within a capitalist environment, right? So then the fundamental question we've got to ask as a society is how can we create new environments that value different hierarchies, that value different human qualities, right? And then how does that change like these notions regarding like equality and femininity? And then he was talking about like sexual structures. I mean, like colonialism and its effect on sexual hierarchies. Like if you thought about like Native American tribes and a lot of African tribes and like these tribal societies, they had a completely different approach to the way their society was organized. It wasn't organized on these pyramidal structures of dominance. It was more of a communal situation. And if you looked at the sexual dynamics within those environments, you had women and men sleeping with each other in this giant like family unit, right?
That's not what you called it before.
Huh? What happened?
That's not what you called it before.
What did I call it?
use
Orgy. Like it's an orgy. No, but orgies aren't bad. It's just like one way they made it. And I was listening to someone talk about this, and he said some Native American cultures actually believe that if a woman, like let's say I had sex with I'm a woman and I had sex with Caleb and what's his name? Jake and Ben and whatever. Yeah. Their seed would mix into like a beautiful mix of them in a child, and that's
not how genetics work.
No, but they didn't know that. So they basically believe that, and right now we're limited by our current biological constraints, And like because of our biology, we operate within these constructs, but with like genetic evolution and everything like that, and like genetic engineering, we might see the disappearance of these structures completely.
Possibly. I think a lot of the current dynamic we have right now is very dominated by the West and
Yeah.
simply about the evolution of Christianity, worldwide, colonialism and all that. But it is interesting to note how structure change is going to face it, and I think, okay, we've totally started a discussion and now class is coming in.
That's fine, keep going.
But
Because this is not what,
this is not about linguistics.
this is not how linguistics, I don't know what it's.
No, this is about linguistics because these hierarchies are modulated within our brains.
Right, but I think for the sake of the linguistics class, we maybe get into in depth to like
Huh?
sexual
What is
activity.
this? Yeah, this is kind of scary.
Wait, can you explain it to us in like a Spark Notes version?
No.
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 We're too
It
far
took
gone.
me 15 minutes to get
Yeah,
here.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
long story short, hierarchies, male versus female, capitalism, how stress levels. We're basically talking about the fact that like women might speak more and be seen as more emotional because they're seen at lower levels of the pyramid, which might.
What if I could do it in 5 minutes?
Do you want me to time you?
Okay,
I'll time
give me
you.
5 minutes and let me try explaining this.
But wait,
I don't think that's
you have to, I don't doubt that you can explain it in 5 minutes.
As it related to linguistics?
No,
Okay.
I want you to take responsibility for other people's comprehension,
Okay. Deal.
alright?
I'm gonna time you.
Well, is that what we're doing? Yeah.
Alright guys, linguistic sexism, something else or new?
Okay. Jake, I need your help. Ben, I need your help. And Tara, I need your help. I need all your help.
Alright, set a timer for 5 minutes and 30 seconds.
Sorry.
Stick my finger in there.
No, this is interesting. I like the what. Wait, what do you mean?
Just like explaining some ideas.
Yeah, okay, set a timer, Sheila.
Okay, so basically, we're talking about the dynamics between males and females within social context and how we approach women talking and men talking and the linguistic profiles of all these different men and women talking in social situations. And I suggested the notion that all interaction is based on the underlying notion of physical violence. Now, what is that idea? Okay, now I'm gonna relate this back to Jordan Peterson, which some of you may not like, and I don't agree with him entirely. But basically, he pointed out that pyramidal structures emerge in capitalist societies. Oh, this is not good. I'm like lost right now.
Okay, well, you have 4
You're 30 seconds in.
Okay,
Gotta pick it up.
pyramidal structures emerge in capitalist societies, and within these pyramidal structures, male attributes are valued within these hierarchies. So things like competition, aggression. Now, if we relate this back to the linguistic profile of like our communication and how males communicate as opposed to females communicate. Oh fuck, dude. Okay. Hierarchy, serotonin regulation.
Yeah, what does serotonin have to do?
We started with the male to female ratio.
Okay, let's start with the lobsters.
Yeah, you.
Okay, so
What
basically.
lobsters?
Okay, so
Remember, Neil, you're responsible for everyone's comprehension.
Okay,
Okay.
let's begin. The lobsters make sense.
This is complicated.
The lobsters were the keystone to me understanding this.
Yeah,
Alright,
you're-
begin with the lobsters. We're running out of time.
You're in charge of morale of the 9th graders, okay?
Okay, so basically scientists discovered that lobsters compete within male dominance hierarchies, and subconsciously the lobsters, so they compete. So there's a lobster that wins and a lobster that loses, and the brains of the lobsters actually recognize their position within the arbitrary hierarchy that they created, and then those brains modulate serotonin. Now, interestingly, the lobsters at the top of this hierarchy have high levels of serotonin, and the lobsters at the lower levels of this hierarchy have lower levels of serotonin. Now, if you think about what serotonin does in the brain, it is responsible for mood regulation. Now, if you think about mood regulation, what does mood regulation have on its effect on the linguistic profile? If your mood is not regulated properly because you're at the bottom of your hierarchy, your linguistic profile will come out more emotional, irrational, and not appreciated. Now, if we relate this back to like male-female presumptions when it comes to communicating in shared spaces, and the females being viewed as being at lower levels of the hierarchy, we can see that like that creates negative constructs. Now, if you think about what hierarchies emerge, right? Okay, which hierarchy emerged in this capitalist society of ours? We have hierarchical structures with the boss at the top and minions at the bottom. And within these structures, we have typically what we've observed is that males have a lot of control and females have less control within these hierarchies, and we attribute that to sexism. Now, if you think about these hierarchies, what do they value? They value male attributes like aggression, competition, selfishness, and all these traditionally male-associated ideas. And at the top, you have males, and at the bottom, you have females. At the top, you have males making a lot of money, females making less money. You have more serotonin at the top and less serotonin at the bottom. And this affects the linguistic profile and communication. And humans subconsciously compute all of this, even if we're not completely aware of it. So basically, a feminist was suggesting how can we value female attributes like sympathy and compassion within this hierarchy. And Jordan Peterson, the guy, he basically said that these hierarchies are the only way humans can organize themselves because they're the only way things will emerge. Basically saying sympathy and compassion will not be valued within these hierarchies, and thus females will not do as well within these systems. So then the actual argument that I'm suggesting is that maybe we need to change the structures that emerge as opposed to being pyramidal. We got to create new environments instead of like we have a capitalist system which favors pyramidal structures. We got to create new environments that value different organizing principles for humans. Now, Jake talked about this with the emergence of colonialism, and if you think of European colonialism in the Americas and how Europeans started destroying tribal Native American societies. If you looked at the cultures of Native Americans, they had a completely different organizing principle. They didn't rely on these pyramidal structures because they didn't operate within a capitalist system. They operated within a different environment, and within this different environment, we had a more egalitarian society where females and males were respected equally within the society. And within these societies, we had females that would have multiple partners and males that would have multiple partners, and just like this giant orgy family situation. And I don't know. I'm just saying that we got to think about, as a human civilization, if we can update our brain software to no longer operate within this, and maybe seek a balance between these two different hierarchies. And this all affects linguistic. It affects linguistics because.
5, 4, 3.
Because our position within the hierarchy affects the way we communicate. And if we want to create a more open society, more circular.
My sister changed my ringtone to a April Fool's thing, and I don't know how to change it.
Okay. Alright, 9th graders, how much of that did you understand?
I understood a lot of it.
Alright, then you've heard it like 3 times at this point, so I'm gonna ask the other one.
So
Okay.
I think the biggest point that we can draw from Will's speech is that to create we need more of a cultural and societal shift if we want to change these unequal power structures. And these unequal power structures often tend to affect how people speak, but also how we view other how we view other dialects. So how many people can look down on African American vernacular English, even though it's not inferior. It's just a different dialect. And so, but it's associated with people that are oftentimes treated worse or lower on the hierarchy in this example.
And I think it's interesting you bring up African Americans in America, because they, as a culture, they have a different approach to sexual relationships. Now, I'm saying that and it's very dicey.
Yeah.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
Alright, that was
Especially from some reason.
On that note.
So if you look at, basically, within our society, a lot of right-wingers are saying the reason why African Americans struggle economically in America is because of the rate of fatherlessness. Now, if you think about the concept of fatherlessness, it just means that we don't, that the government doesn't recognize the familial structures that emerge within African American society. Like, there's this whole, like, baby mama, baby baba, what's it? Baby daddy concept that exists in African American cultures that isn't present in other cultures. Do you understand what I'm saying?
It's getting more white people are also being raised with single mothers too, actually, nowadays.
I guess it's changing. It's changing now. But how does that affect, like, the language of those societies? Do you understand, like, the idea of baby mom, that's actually like a verb or an adjective. What is it?
Noun.
It's a noun that exists in that linguistic profile because it's a reflection of the culture. We don't have that. Like, there's no idea of, like, baby mama in, like, traditional American, like, British English.
So I think that for the right wing to criticize, like, the lack of definite father figures in Black culture is a bit rage constrained. In a lot of cases, they've been incarcerated on Trump
Yeah, that's what I'm
that
saying.
were created by Republican administrations in the 70s. But as to how it relates to linguistics, I think that's just an example of how every single culture adapts words and creates words to fit the needs of their society, right? Okay. Mr. Eagles, you want to talk? Are we going to continue this? Like,
We can, but I was actually gonna introduce a term to help us raise our level of discourse about what Neil was saying, because actually, Neil, there are studies being done on the effects of serotonin and language, and the term that you need to know is something which we could have talked about on the first day, is something called prosody. Okay. Prosody is it's kind of hard to define, but it's kind of like the rhythm and intonation that a language user uses, and you, as the listener, the prosody affects how you distinguish the breaks between words. So actually, because we learn to read and we see words on pages and we signify a break, how do we signify a break between words on a page?
A space.
A blank space, right? So sometimes if we try to, like, visualize what words look like when we're speaking, we kind of think of words on a page with spaces in between them. But actually, the spaces in between words aren't silence, right? We don't stop speaking in between words. We just keep going and keep going and keep going. And that's why, later on, Neil, you might challenge this, but that's why linguists think that there can never be a computer that can mimic human language 100%. They can get really good at it, but it's never going to be perfect, because a computer can't handle the organic prosody of language. Okay? And then the other thing is, there's another thing called suprasegmentals. Okay, and suprasegmentals are things like pitch, loudness, right? So this doesn't have anything to do with the content of what you're saying or the phonemes or the morphemes that you're saying. It has to do with, like, the way that you're saying them. Does that make sense? Okay, so prosody is like rhythm and tempo and intonation. Suprasegmental is like the length or the loudness or the pitch at which you're saying something. Okay, and interestingly, there are studies of serotonin levels, which is is it a hormone? I don't even know.
It's neurochemical.
Okay, it's a neurochemical that's associated with, like, our mood. So Neil's right. Like, when we have high levels of serotonin, we generally feel
Good,
we feel good, and then lower levels of serotonin, we feel bad. Scientists are studying the relationship between serotonin levels and prosody, and serotonin levels and suprasegmentals. And you can kind of think about this, because there's an example. Remember when, just a few moments ago, when Neil was kind of talking, and then the freshman came in, and then Antara said, "Wait, Neil, start talking about the lobsters." Do you remember that? And then I'm going to put Sahana on the spot. Do you remember how Sahana responded?
Lobsters?
Kind of like that. She said, "What lobsters?" Right? Right? So if we look at, and it's not personal, it's just, we can imagine, like, we knew what was going on. They walked into something complicated and trying to understand it, having a difficult time understanding it, and then Antara, seemingly trying to help, is like, "Oh, just talk about the lobsters." And you're like, "That doesn't make any sense to me. What lobsters?" Right? And so we can all imagine, like, the kind of emotions that are connected with that kind of prosody and that kind of super segmental, right? So we have the words what, lobsters. We could write that out in the International Phonetic Alphabet, but the prosody and super segmentals is going to tell us a lot more information about the speaker. So the prosody and the super segmentals of the way that was said tells us that the person is, I don't know, frustrated, surprised, confused, right? All kinds of things. Yeah, maybe angry. I don't know. All kinds of things. And we all know that you can sometimes when a person is speaking, emotion comes through the voice, right? And that's through prosody and super segmentals. So that's very interesting. I did not anticipate that coming up today, but I literally just looked up these articles as you were saying that and found that out that it is a thing.
Well, like, speaking of language and serotonin, do we know the ways in which we can increase our serotonin through language and through like hearing different people or tones or words or expressions? Because I know like in tennis, like you can, when you're playing doubles, you can increase your serotonin and sort of like the chemicals in your brain by like giving high fives or like interacting with people. And
Yeah.
conversation.
And what about like when you're, because speaking of tennis, what about like when you're making a serve and like making a noise when you're serving?
Well, that's just grunting. That's like you're like tightening up your core. And you're like focusing on more muscles in order to like more like almost like not correctly, but like you're focusing on more things, and you're able to use more muscles when you grunt.
So that's what feedback loops, like this idea of feedback loops. The interesting thing about serotonin, mood regulation, and lobsters is that when the lobster lost, he continued losing because it's a downward spiral of serotonin regulation. But when the scientists injected the lobster with serotonin, he was like, and he went back and he fought, and then went back up the hierarchy. So now they're arbitrarily using exogenous hormones and drugs to like inject and then modulate your behavior. But with like what we had earlier, if you consciously decide to increase your serotonin by executing behavioral functions that require serotonin, like you decide to stay calm and collected, you just decide to operate a certain way, you can reverse the feedback loop, go back up the hierarchy. So now when it comes to linguistics, if you are angry, this is me just like supposing and hypothesizing, but if you're angry and you continue speaking angry, your neurochemical profile will reflect that, and your behavior will reflect that, and your state of mind and your state of being will reflect that. But if you decide to consciously change the way you exist and the way you talk, you can actually reverse that and go back up. So
Do lobsters not have the capability to consciously?
Lobsters are too stupid to do it.
They can't do like mindfulness activities.
They're like, it's like
Lobster
they're
meditation.
They're not like, oh, let me just take like a walk, you know.
But the ones in Finding Nemo are so chill.
What was it in Mr. Jones and Miss Parsons?
So basically, I guess that's what our higher levels of cognitions afford us, our ability to control the feedback loops that other animals aren't fortunate enough to have the capacity to think about.
I don't know, man.
What's your opinion?
On what? I don't even know what the question is at this point.
on this entire thing.
I don't know. I don't know enough to form an opinion on that.
Okay.
Okay. Let's do this. Are there any other questions on the table from what we were reading about the language stereotype that women talk too much? We explored that. We talked about why that is, and then we kind of looked at the experiments and had a discussion on that. Had very interesting discussions about experiences at school in a particular setting. Is there anything else that people wanted to say on that?
I think it's to do with serotonin.
Okay. Or any other questions that we had on that?
The rate of serotonin synthesis is 52% greater in male than in female subjects.
Okay.
This is the largest difference between the brains of males and females that is not related to binding sites.
Let's bring it back to linguistics though, and language. I was sharing with one thing that I would like you guys to do, and one thing that I think is like the real purpose of this class. We're not going like as in depth as we could into a lot of these things because I want you guys to see that like linguistics is a broad field and there's all different ways of studying it. But now that you do hear these things and see these things, I think you'll notice them more. So one thing that I read earlier from a sociological perspective, men and women communicate with each other differently. One very base, and humans don't really know why they do this, but they just observe this. So like when a group of men are talking together versus when a group of women are talking together, they will actually organize themselves differently. So women will have a higher tendency to look at each other and arrange themselves face to face when they're communicating, whereas men will oftentimes face the same direction when they're communicating, right? And that sounds like a crazy thing to say, but like if you think about like parents hanging out at a sporting event or something, you could see like the moms like kind of huddled in a circle talking, and you can imagine like the dads in a line watching the game, still talking to each other, but like they're in a line, they're not actually looking at each other.
It's a circle.
Okay.
The hierarchies.
Yeah.
No,
Well,
that like totally makes sense. Like even if I'm grabbing just like food, like with my friends at Panera, like I like talk to them sometimes. They still like face the same direction, but they're in conversation with me, which I find like really weird. But like now that you mention it,
yeah, and like guys will have more intense conversations in the car because they're all facing the same direction when they're in the car.
Yeah, but I don't know.
Isn't that weird?
Look at this hardness table. This is like more of a feminine structure.
I don't know about that. It's, like,
Yeah, we're a circle.
it's literally named after a man, Harkness.
Yeah, whatever. But I think like this,
But I don't know.
this increases like more feminine type communication in terms of linguistics.
No, because if I'm communicating to these people, then it's more masculine.
Yeah, yes.
No.
We're gonna make this into less of an ellipse and more into a circle.
This is not what Mr. wants.
It's not his own. But Jake, you said you have like experience with that?
Yeah, definitely.
Weird. Yeah. So you pay attention to it, like, and I don't think it's like necessary to make a judgment call or anything. There's lots of scientists who know a lot more about this, and probably evolutionary scientists that have better explanations. But it's once I heard that, and you just observe it everywhere.
Does
So
attention
interesting.
span in conversations like differ as well?
Attention span in conversation.
In conversations, yeah.
Between genders.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think there's lots of other things going on
Yeah.
with attention span rather than gender. To be honest with you. Attention is the highest valued commodity right now.
Fair.
Yeah.
It's interesting if you think about it that way. Okay. We have done a lot over the past few days, and I think we've kind of covered a variety of things, and I wanted to give everyone an opportunity to experiment with their own line of inquiry about literally anything. Jake hates the word line of inquiry. Why?
I don't want to go through the process of making another question again.
Okay.
I've done way too much.
All right.
Like I do not want to write like an inquiry origin story right now.
I'm not asking you to write any inquiry origin story.
We don't have
Just chill.
So much jump.
Just chill. But like what Antara did today is a good example of what I'd like everyone to have the opportunity to do. Meaning find something that's like kind of weird or kind of interesting, something that you're wondering about. Anything with linguistics, and no matter what it is, no matter how stereotypical it is, like from a linguistic standpoint, we now know that like there's a way that we can examine all kinds of different assumptions that we make about language and people who speak them. This is something that we can kind of investigate. So Antara did a great one about a stereotype of women who talk, the stereotype that women talk too much, right? We explored that, discussed it, great. I'd like everyone to have the opportunity to do that, not necessarily at Antara's level because she did an excellent job. And if you do, right, didn't she do a good job? Yeah, let's get on her. She did a great job.
Does it have to be a stereotype?
It doesn't have to be a stereotype. So there's I want to distinguish between two things. There's stereotypes, right, which are like sociolinguistics, and then there's also like more science-y things going on linguistically. So for example, there's like questions about the brain that we still don't know. There's still things about like concepts like prosody and supersegmentalism. There's random, I have a couple of case studies about like language in isolation, like what happens when a language is a very small group of people create a language and then there's no interaction. What happens when there is interaction? What happens when languages get mixed? Has anyone heard of pigeons before?
Yeah, pigeon. Yeah.
What do you know about pigeons?
It's one of a group of people.
No, it's not a bird.
England switched to genetic
Like, what a group
engineering
of
for the
people
means of
who,
reproduction
all
as
speak,
opposed to like sexual male
they
sexual
don't- they all speak
reproduction.
kind of
We'll see the
different
emergence of
languages.
those types of
Okay.
structures,
They, like,
more like Native
create, like,
Americans
their
and
own
African
language
tribes
kind
and
of
tribal
like,
societies. Because
Kind of
instead of
It's
like
almost like a diet.
Kind
So
of.
it's not a
Jake,
like
what
if
do you
I
know
don't have a
about
family
pigeons?
unit and
Where-
I create
where have you
children,
seen
I'll
this
like mix
before?
your
Where have
DNA,
you
his
heard
DNA,
of
their
this?
DNA, as opposed to like
Let's listen to Jake.
the way the Native Americans believe that
Listen to
sexual
Jake.
reproduction works.
I did like a study
Interesting.
over the summer on like Nigeria, and there were a bunch of articles written in pidgin.
Okay.
On like Nigeria, and I looked up pidgin, and it's almost like a mix of languages in regions, and it's like it's often spoken, not necessarily written.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
like when it's written, it's like a little bit confusing.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's just a combination of a couple like languages like English and other languages.
Yeah.
And then-
Okay, so it's interesting because Jake said he read an article about pigeon
Well, that
And-
was written in pidgin.
or written in pigeon. So it's funny. The word pigeon is used in different contexts. In this class, pigeon is a concept, not necessarily a specific language. Because in Nigeria, they might say, "Oh, this is written in pigeon," because in that particular thing, that particular language, they'll just call it pigeon, but it's also a pigeon, right? In the Caribbean, there are lots of pigeons as well. But a pigeon is basically when two languages, when there are, they kind of happen when there's communities of people who speak different languages and the languages kind of connect and they're kind of like mixed, but they're not quite a mixed language yet, okay? And a pigeon, one thing that's kind of fun about a pigeon is there are no native speakers of a pigeon, right?
And then Creole is one that they're native
Yeah.
native speakers.
Creoles are, Creoles do have native speakers. So, where does anybody know of an example where a Creole exists?
Haiti.
Like French Creole.
Yeah, in Haiti, they call it, in Haiti, they speak what's called French Creole. Okay, and French Creole is what? What do we
French
think
and
that is?
Spanish.
Combination of French and like West African languages?
Yeah, it's a combination of French and West African languages. There are native speakers of that. And so this is like something that you could study, and when you study pidgins, creoles, and mixed languages, you actually figure out how languages come to exist, because like eventually a pidgin is when like there's language communities that are kind of talking to each other, and then they just like are struggling to figure each other out, and then they'll speak in mixed languages, but they only do that when they speak to each other, so therefore there are no native speakers. But then they keep doing that for a few generations, and then all of a sudden there are native speakers, and then you get Creole, and then that language becomes more and more established, and then you get a mixed language, and then it's just there for a while, and it's just a language. Right?
So it's like
So, yeah.
evolution of language.
It could be, yeah, it could be. So there's that. We didn't talk about sign language yet. That's definitely a sign language. That's something that you can look at. And then Neil, I'm assigning you computational linguistics.
What is it?
Neil will tell us.
Do we have to do a presentation on it?
I'd like you to share. You don't have to do like a formal presentation, but I'd like you to share. And then
It's like
I'd like you to share, and then have like a couple discussion questions that you want to throw out to the class.
So we each choose one of these.
So we all have a day?
Do all of them, do all of them.
Yes.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, that. Do all of them.
Are we, well, how long are we?
All right.
Well, for
When's
one
the due
side,
date?
Do mine.
It's not even lunch yet. It's not even lunch yet.
When's it due?
So what was language in isolation when you learned it?
Oh no! Language in isolation.
That's how language emerges.
I can also like we don't have to decide right now this instant. I can speak to you all individually about this.
So we're like doing kind of like a research project?
It's
here?
kind of
Yeah.
fun.
We have to write a
So wait,
report.
can a pidgin language be a mix of more
Yeah,
than
I'm
two
not writing
languages?
it.
Yeah.
Like 17?
If
Word.
I even have to write like.
What do you
on
think the
Google
pidgin
Doc,
language of the
this is
planet
what
will
I'm
be
gonna work out.
eventually?
Okay.
Or the Creole?
English, Mandarin, Spanish.
Yeah,
Something like
language
that.
in isolation though is about like when a community, a very
Yeah,
small
it's still like
community
different.
speaks a language and it doesn't have
It's
any
only that
contact
place.
with
We just
with
don't
any
know.
other
Will
languages.
emerge.
And then the other thing is, so that's like, those are like kind of technical stuff, and then there's different stereotypes. There's a lot in here. I can pass this book around. You can all look at the. I'm sure I read most of it.
It's a good book. It's short.
Yeah.
Classification of languages is like the families, like Germanic.
Yes,
Romance,
families.
Romance.
Yeah, understanding like how languages are classified. They actually talk about genetics of language. So that's something you're interested in.
It's like literally every.
Well, you don't know what you're doing yet.
I've been operating on the hypothesis that I need to climb a pyramid.
Yeah.
But what if I need to just build a circle
What is it?
or a cone?
Just in general?
It's a combination of two.
Right.
Just
So,
in general, or in what
pass
context?
that book around. If you're
In my
interested in like stereotypes or language myths, take a look at the table of contents and think about it. But also, what I'd like people to do now is to just like brainstorm random things. Because these, it could be something like this. It could be something in the book. It could be something you've come up with as well. However much you know the book.
And then even this design.
I'm not gonna
Yeah.
lie.
When we're ready.
Shirley has to do that tomorrow.
Some of these are like true.
Can I do another thing in addition to the thing I'm doing tomorrow? Okay.
Yeah. Or if you want to do, if you want your thing tomorrow to be a thing, like that can be a thing.
What are you doing tomorrow?
I can do another one.
Shaylee's gonna be, yeah, it's gonna be intense.
No, it's not.
It's to get as intense as this one, I think.
What?
I
Try
think
to
it,
match the energy. of
it
the-
I
is
mean,
gonna
it's
get
not.
intense.
It's not like existential like this one was.
It's gonna get existential though.
I think it could.
You're doing it.
Bro,
It's gonna get intense.
But I'm also
Shaylee.
looking at like how people believe things, and like I want to bring in like a bunch of other clips, and, like based on how they're talking.
And that'll get intense.
Shaylee, you gotta control your feedback loop mechanism.
What does that mean?
It's like you gotta start believing what you're doing is about,
It's already mentioned.
Okay.
and then it will,
Yeah.
because
Okay.
you'll start behaving in such a way it will go out.
Okay.
You can't degrade yourself.
It's
Feedback.
valued.
Feedback loops.
Should I start writing out what this?
Alright, let's give people an opportunity to like think about stuff.
I have tennis, I have a mixed doubles.
What do you want to do? Do you want to do language families?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, that's classification of languages.
I'm gonna write scale next to conversation.
What
Oh,
is
you can,
it?
you can do, you can,
Yeah.
okay, and you can do
Nobody
classification
said
of
email.
languages.
Nobody said anything about this.
Huh?
There's like a spike ball tournament today. I had no idea.
What?
oh yeah, we're in that.
He said, yeah, Harrison said he was gonna send an email.
Why didn't
Joe, you're in the
So
beginner's
funny.
bracket, right?
Yeah, and you guys, if you wanna do this
Yeah, okay.
with a partner, that's fine. If you wanna do it individually, that's fine too.
Wait, when is it?
It's not an ice cream.
When we're ready.
Supposedly today.
Are we supposed
During
to
the
choose
day?
one of those?
You can choose one of those, or you can brainstorm like anything, anything that has to do with language that you wanna understand.
If we do sign language, what are we gonna be doing? Just talking about the language itself?
Well, we can just work together.
Okay. Mention some sun. Or black raspberry.
Mr. Abel,
Yeah,
if we chose to do like, for example,
here,
sign
come here and
language,
look,
There's
'cause
another one I could do.
Wait, can we partner up?
like if we chose to do for
Yeah,
example,
just
sign
that's
language,
You ever
and
seen
how
those brain games?
Yeah.
Is it
No.
the spike ball tournament actually?
I used to
Yeah.
love that
So
show.
here, like, let's.
It's basically like a like docu-series
I
on
had,
how
yeah,
your
I
brain
had
works,
civic
but through like
resources
games.
I don't want you to think about requirements, I want you to think about.
I
I had played spike ball in like 3
Yeah.
years.
Wait, also, you were in
While I want you to
Hawaii.
think about it,
Yeah.
Are you going to that thing?
Yeah.
If you were to do sign language, like,
There was like a.
I'm gonna do,
Were you inducted last
show
year?
you.
Yeah.
What's your
What
reason
extent
question?
is
What
written
There was something
language
this
like
morning,
that?
actually.
Oh, that's what I was.
Oh, I was like, wait, okay, they're doing two things, that's two things too many.
And then you're like, in conclusion.
That's what I was.
Yeah.
Need to know
So
extent.
here, let's just write down.
This is just bagels. It was the bagels that we already got in class. It will still the rest of them.
I just want to get the
Secure
the
clauses.
email out of my inbox, but I don't really see it.
Might have something to do with,
Some
like different languages and like the roles of,
What?
the roles of
Yeah.
different languages.
The notebook?
The blueprint.
Just like.
No.
But I might look at prehistoric languages.
Throw it again.
No, that actually doesn't make sense. I'll just look at like the earliest of languages and like generals
I'm
and
gonna click.
cases. Like I'll look at Hammurabi's
Like
language.
cases.
If they steal from
If I could out-
Here.
chopped it like.
I gotta outlaw
Take a
you
look
that.
at like just this first page.
Cause like it'd be
It's
cool.
good sans.
And then if that's something you wanna do, I can make photocopies for you.
Hieroglyphics.
Do you have something
And,
about dialects?
Yeah, so take that, read that, and then go back to the table of
just like
contents and see
daily
what.
life, like,
Cave paintings.
history.
I should do something with Neanderthals.
Well, after all, you are 95% more than Neanderthal than most people.
87.
Yeah, I don't know why.
You know, I'm only 5%.
Yeah, no, it's a
I'm very,
topic.
I'm very on the
No,
end.
it's a topic. No, I know it's a topic.
That's an L, dude.
I think that's a W.
It's an L.
Yes, we'll be like,
How much does that cost?
No, you're only stupid.
Why do you need?
Should we start writing on this page too, what stuff is?
Isn't it?
Mr. Abel.
Yeah.
I've got an idea.
sure.
What's that?
So probably.
It's reconstructing Proto-Indo-European.
Excellent. Reconstruction of language, that's a thing.
Yeah.
Should I write that?
And
How do we,
can I,
what does that mean to reconstruct the word?
Ben's gonna tell us.
okay, can I talk about how they also managed to like learn a little bit about like the culture
That is curious.
Yeah.
from the language?
Yeah.
It's tree.
Can anybody think of examples of languages that have been reconstructed?
Hebrew.
Hebrew. Tell us about Hebrew.
Oh, it was revived. It's the only language ever to be
So from a
to be a
linguistics
revived language.
from a linguistics perspective, the term is reconstructed.
I took a course on this.
Right. What do you know about Hebrew? Why is Hebrew reconstructed?
I didn't do it.
I don't know that much history of it, surprisingly, for once in my life.
Jews are superior, they
But-
can like.
You know,
I know they
were
were
thinking of
having
having
their
their
official
official
like
language
more
be
movement to like
Yiddish.
pan-Judaism and like they
What?
like
They were
it's like
thinking of
Zionist
having their
movement in
Yeah.
Europe.
Yiddish.
And
That was
I
likely
got the idea
because
of
more
like,
people spoke
like,
Yiddish than Hebrew.
different
If you're able-
languages.
And you know the only, and you know how they reconstructed it? They had a kid, a guy had a kid, the only thing he spoke Hebrew had a kid, he did not let him go to
He's
school,
like
and
the
he spoke
accent
Hebrew to him.
I want to know if it's this accent quiz that I took that gave me.
The time one's the most interesting one. There's another website where they have
300, more like
and you say,
3,000.
Yeah.
Like I never knew tag sale was just a
lock
thing.
him in his house.
Mr. Abel,
Yeah.
can I do the genders in
Seriously?
language,
Yeah.
like how there are like more than two and many
That's
more?
actually
Never die
Yes.
out.
Oh,
It's a language never dies out. And then he had a kid, and then the
Why?
kid spoke Hebrew, so then that happened.
It's like how does if it's not actually like it's like British accent, like why
Here.
is it like
We're talking about dialects.
Yeah.
Is there something? Is there a
Oh,
topic
yeah.
about
There's
dialects?
something
Yeah, like it.
Because this isn't a.
Kevin Spacey's facing sexual charges.
how do all the
I
sounds
saw that.
Who is Kevin
that are
Spacey?
how are all of the pronunciations
Terrible.
Yeah, but isn't he crazy?
lining
Yeah, he like sexual assaulted like.
is it a certain accent?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, or
Oh, can I talk about
do the
how
things
they
always.
Yeah, absolutely.
I feel like how Spanish
No.
Yeah. Yeah.
all the different
Yeah. Okay. So, guys, listen up. I have some texts and some resources that talk about linguistic concepts. If you want to like take these concepts and learn these words and then apply them to a specific situation in a specific context, that would be great. So, for example, we just talked about reconstructing languages. Ben has selected a specific language that he knows about, Proto-Indo-European, right?
Yeah, well, not really, but kind of.
Kind of, or something you want to know about. You're aware of it and you want to know about it, so that's fine.
Yeah.
Can you think I do the reconstruction of
Yeah,
Hebrew?
but check this out.
Yeah.
Just watch this until lunch.
Yeah, okay.
I don't
Yeah.
wanna be like the last 100%.
So here's something that I want you guys to look up right now, because this is an easy thing to find out. The Hebrew that is spoken in Israel today, linguists don't call it. They don't call it Hebrew. They don't think it's the same Hebrew that was spoken like thousands of years ago. So they call it something else. Find out what they call it.
Joe. Modern Hebrew.
Joe,
No.
True, watch this because it'll get us right up until.
don't skew numbers, man.
We have a video,
Can we
six
go
next
watch?
video to make sure it has stuff.
Oh yeah, is that the one about the woman who wakes up with an Irish? Okay, yeah.
Is
And then,
it
can we show the video too?
Okay.
Or should we just?
I would, so for you guys, like, you'll have plenty of time to watch the whole video, and then, like, think about what clips you want to show the class.
Okay, then you kind of.
Sounds good?
Yeah, you can.
Alright,
What's it called?
foreign
Are we going to lunch?
They're working on their
Oh,
thing.
I know what it's
I'm gonna work
called.
on my thing.
What is it
Yeah,
called?
I'm gonna work on my thing.
Because
Yeah.
I
Wait,
took
can we work
I had to take a
outside?
course on this because I'm
No.
planning like something in Israel this summer and they made me take a course on this.
Okay,
Hebrew.
what's your question?
I don't know, I wrote 7.
thing is like how
6.
to get
No, that's like ugly.
Why? It's ugly.
Bro.
What does this mean?
I already
Whoa.
Is it not just called modern
When
Hebrew?
languages meet.
What? Isn't that just called modern Hebrew?
One language, like surmount the other one with one.
It's not.
Okay.
Okay, too bad.
I mean, it's not me.
What does this mean?
Like,
it's all written down.
like,
It's all said bigger brain.
formalizing language.
Oh yeah. So this
True.
is like prescriptive grammar versus descriptive grammar.
Yeah.
Okay, so really good example of this.
That's your.
There's the
It's called Israeli
the
DNA.
Oxford
It's
English
Israeli
Dictionary.
DNA.
Yeah.
It's just
Mostly
like
old.
half Jewish, half old.
Old, they're all old, and they're mostly men who like sit around a table and like manage the English language.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Because by including what's in the Oxford English Dictionary,
mine's pretty
that's
cool.
like one standard of what's included in English and what's not, what's included in a word and what's not. And then you could do a comparative study with the, you take Spanish, you can do the Real Academia Española, the Royal Academy
I
of
got
Spanish. It's the
Arlington,
exact same thing,
DC,
it's
and
the people
Boston.
that like sit around and manage the Spanish language.
It's a weird mix.
And Northeast.
Romania.
Really?
Or this one, I don't know, which
Oh,
one
I
do you
actually
think,
have my
which one do you
laptop
think?
on
I
it.
like this one,
Never
but also like,
Serbia.
a lot of them are good.
That's what I get.
Alright, versus.
I always get like Boston,
really?
Providence, New York. Like it's specifically like it's just
Accent
like
quiz?
It's
No.
so interesting.
it's always like a glaring red flag just because you're from Connecticut to me because it's all the
I
same
don't work on
surrounds.
projects. It's called Israeli Hebrew.
Right, so Israeli
Well, I'm
Hebrew
Jewish.
is, I think, the official term for the language. From a linguistic perspective, I think linguists don't call it a language, they call it something else.
Hebrew.
Because it's been
when I'm
reconstructed.
supposed to wake up?
Is
8:53
it not?
a.m.
It's not just called modern Hebrew.
Miserable.
No, it's Israeli.
Joseph, when are you supposed to wake up?
I missed
Israeli?
the thing this morning.
Joseph, when are you supposed to wake
Do you
up?
want to get a pen? The Bakshiaki?
Ask
When I'm
Mr.
supposed to
Matt.
wake up. Oh,
When do you wake
Mr.
up?
Matt.
late.
It's late.
Why has
I feel
this
like mine's
disconnected
fake.
me from the Wi-Fi?
They call it a modern language. They don't call it like.
It's so annoying when that happens.
I don't even know how this happens, but sometimes it doesn't let me back in. No,
Go all the way down.
I lost Wi-Fi.
32.
Haha. You sleep less than
They
me.
call it a Semitic
Take
language.
the L.
Yeah, so Semitic language, that's a language family.
No, that's yeah.
That's the family that it comes from.
Canaanite subgroup. Hebrew? Sorry, Israeli. You don't call it Israeli.
They're called like New Hebrew.
I heard someone say Taktika on Harvard Yard, and I was like, ew, stop, it's not a such thing. It's terrible.
No, I had a friend from Boston who actually did used to pronounce words like that. Not as extreme.
No, I heard someone say
Oh,
that
oh,
exact
sorry.
phrase.
Like unironically?
Yes, there. And I was like, stop.
No.
I couldn't tell. I hope it was ironically.
Oh, sorry, where are you?
How come I can't access Wi? Oh my god. Okay. You basically
Oh, if there's code, if there's a code, it's 1028. What's that? People with a bridge. Which bridge? They could bring to me. What are they called? Probably the wrong.
You gave me this book, Mr. Hable?
Later.
Wait, am I? What?
I don't have Wi-Fi.
You just pass around the table. We already
Yes.
passed it this way.
When is this due?
This is a May term, it's due when it's ready.
So, okay, fine.
Can
Next
it be
year.
ready next year?
No,
I'll be ready by
thank you.
next
Did anybody find any like chapters in here that are interesting?
Wait, I didn't read it.
Then take a look at it.
Oh.
But what is it that's gonna be ready? Our knowledge of the topic?
Yeah.
Is that better?
It's gonna share some stuff that you learned and have some
Oh,
questions,
that's like
some
the
discussion
big
questions.
So do you have a smart house?
Oh, my hard drive got fucked.
Sally, how's Jalen your pen? No. Take Ben's.
The Oscar message.
Take it away forever.
Don't do someone's on the low.
Today's the 25th.
26.
Oh my god, it's the 26th of May. It's crazy.
They call it a lingua franca,
What's that mean?
Lingua
or a
franca.
bridge language, or an auxiliary language.
You just reject. That's for the little project.
always were highly disagree with that, I think.
Of course, yeah, yeah.
That's how you feel like that.
What?
Yeah.
It's like they said Hebrew wasn't a language, people would like, that means or that.
Wait, what?
They don't call them, like, the new Hebrew a language.
So what do they call it?
I forget what you just called it.
Utterances?
Lingua franca.
But that's not the name of it. Well, that's like a term. It's not like.
Right. So linguists, again, linguists emphasize the fact that language is innate and instinctual to humans, and it's something that happens like organically. The Hebrew that is spoken in Israel today did not happen organically. It's reconstructed from ancient Hebrew, and in fact, some people would call it a Creole because they mix it with other modern languages today, like Yiddish, for example, and so it's not the same. Like the Hebrew that's spoken in Israel today is not the same Hebrew that's spoken that was spoken thousands of years ago. It's a modernized version of it, but it's also like something that was reconstructed about 100 years ago. Yeah, a little more than 100 years ago.
I think linguists have weird definitions.
I wish I spoke English.
You serious?
Your grandpa speaks English. Yeah, he told me. That's pretty cool. My grandpa could understand some Yiddish. Because their grandparents spoke Yiddish.
If somebody's ready to present this afternoon, we can do that. Shaylee's gonna present tomorrow.
I'm pretty
on
burnt out for
something.
today.
I'll present tomorrow, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, significantly, my head just hurts.
I'll present Saturday.
And then tomorrow we only have a half day, so
Half days. I love half days.
yeah.
I don't like half days on May term.
Wait, tomorrow's Friday.
Tomorrow's Friday.
Oh wow, that won't bug pretty.
Yeah. We did a lot.
We have like 2 full days of class left.
For reference, guys, I modeled this class off of a class that I took in college, and we already went through a whole semester of linguistics at college level course. Yeah.
That's disturbing.
No, I mean, it's how we should learn. Like, I feel like you should just go, you should like really go to GFA and be like, just do like 20 May terms in a
One
year.
class at a time.
It'd be cool.
Very unique.
It'd be unique and much more efficient, in my
No
opinion.
grades either.
Maybe like 2 weeks intense and then a week off, and then 2 weeks intense and a week off.
2 weeks just for one class only.
Yeah, and then you take a week off.
I think it'd be awesome.
I won't even need a
You'd be
summer.
able to become way more invested in the material too.
I'm gonna make a school like that. I'll call it GFA, Gowande Farms Academy.
Gowande Farms Academy.
Go on.
It should be GFA, but like the letter should stand for something else. So I like the G for Gowande. Gowande.
Yeah.
Farms Academy.
Instead of farms, it should be something else. Like
Family. Do hierarchy.
no. Fields.
Gowande Fields.
Yeah. Gowande Fields.
Academy.
I don't know what would happen on your Gowande Fields if that was a thing.
That'd be crazy. I want to make a school one day.
That'd be
In the metaverse.
Your school would be in the metaverse.
I hate this.
What do you have to like do to like establish a school?
Make one.
Like legally?
Legally, I mean, not that much. It just has to be like, your school. One standard is accreditation. So like GFA is accredited by the New England Association of Independent Schools.
Yeah. But you can make up your own association to be accredited.
Yeah,
by,
yeah.
Right, technically.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you can make like some really like stupid ass school, and it's still like technically like you're going to school 180 days a year for,
Yeah.
for 18 years.
Yeah.
Or for whatever, however long you
Yeah.
legally amount to. That's really stupid.
What?
How easy it is to like get out of school, even though school is like.
There's actually in wrestling. There's a guy who made a school. It's just his house,
Yeah.
and then it's a school, right? And it's just like 20 kids that just wrestle all day, every day, all the time.
Yeah.
And then they just go to tournaments. They literally know nothing but wrestling, and they're pretty good.
Do they have like brain damage from just wrestling all day, every day?
I mean, probably. I have brain damage.
Well, San Jose, what are you interested in?
I want to do like Latin and dead languages. If that makes sense.
Oh, ancient, like, what is the role of ancient languages?
Sure.
Okay. I think there's one in that book. Is there a chapter in that book about ancient languages?
Good afflictions. Thanks, Al. They could have just like cared about that place before.
Yes.
Wait, do that again?
I just do some
I can't. I never learned how to whistle. Hey. I can't do it.
Then do you whistle blowing in or blowing out?
Blowing out.
I'll go in.
I do
I do
both.
both.
Yeah.
You should make a language of whistling.
There is a language
There
of
is a
whistling.
language of
We
whistling.
talked about that.
Multiple languages.
I know. You should make another one. Or you should learn it.
What does that mean?
I think
Nice
whistle
job,
is
Propacious.
Actually?
What about? Would this be considered a language? Like, if I like communicated like that?
Has to have mutual intelligibility.
Jake, come on. What do I say?
The Morse code? Is Morse code a language or not?
Seriously?
Yeah.
I like remember reading
Where?
about a society that used knot tying as a way to like communicate.
Not what?
It's QUIP, that's how it's spelled, I think.
Not dying.
Not.
Not like they would tie knots and that's how they would like mark and communicate with others.
That's crazy.
Time off? Oh. You know what I'm saying?
Was that in middle school? No, that was this year.
What does linguistics have to do with like hand gestures? Like
Like,
a-
sign,
like
who's doing
Ita-
sign language?
like
Somebody doing sign
Italians?
language? No?
Like they go like.
But that's just like
What?
speaking.
That's
but that's-
pantomiming, yeah.
Yeah, that's just like communicating using
Yeah.
your body as well.
No, but like I feel like it's intrinsic to the language. Like you can't speak Italian and not go like.
Can we talk about human-made languages? Like all languages are human-made, but there's some that are kind of like natural, but there's some like Morse code that like the military use.
Yeah, yeah.
Kind of like-
Esperanto also. Somebody tried to make a universal language called Esperanto.
What was he thinking?
Didn't work.
No.
Obviously.
What was he thinking? Like to force everyone to learn this language?
People are still learning it.
People speak Esperanto.
I
Yeah.
learned some of it when I was in like elementary school.
Actually, I've never heard of that until now.
Does Duolingo work?
No.
If you do
It
it,
does.
if you're like dedicated to it.
Well, actually, Mr. Abel, does it work for
1887.
Chinese?
Yes, I'm a better Chinese student than you are.
It's a lie.
You learn Chinese to Duolingo?
Well, I already knew
Try
a little.
to.
I already knew a little bit of it, and then I resist the urge. I resist what Duolingo makes me do with like writing, because I don't know how to read or write Mandarin. But-
He only goes halfway.
Jake, say something like that Mr. Abel wouldn't know.
Yeah, but you can't.
Hold on, I'm doing Wordle.
It's a good idea.
Oh yeah.
What am I doing right now?
I tried to do a Wordle and
我们
Latin
毕
once and I
业以后，
completely
你打
got
算
lost. So upsetting.
继续学12的
Oh my god, I got
Mr. Abel, can I go to lunch?
What time is it?
Wait, is it E?
You
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
have
you
to
guys
wait.
can go to lunch.
You don't know what that
Can I go
means
to lunch?
either.
Okay, like I'll just try to explain it. Like Sanskrit is a very poetic language, and the way it's like, it would have been. It's a dead language now.
Right.
But the way it would be spoken is very it's like a wave. It's not like linear, and that's expressed through the different languages that emerge, like Hindi and Marathi. But if you look at Indian dancing and Indian music, when in Indian music, when they go from note to note, they don't go beep boom. They go bo. There's a as they're increasing, there's actually a vibration as opposed to linear dots. If you look at the way they dance, it's like, I don't know, it's slightly different. And what is that? Is that cultural, genetic? It has to.
I don't think it's genetic. I think it's like cultural.
I would say I think the issue with genetics is people get tied to like racism and all these notions, which is like a heavy baggage. But when we're looking at like different populations, genetics has to be a huge factor.
Yeah, of course.
That we're just not considering because it's too dicey. It's too what is it? It's very a sensitive topic.